If we could take our seats. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining Community Board 5 for an evening of insightful discussion about Penn Station. My name is Craig Slutskin, and I'm the Vice Chair of Manhattan Community Board 5. Community Board 5 is proud to host this forum on the future of Penn Station, a thought-provoking panel discussion regarding one of the largest and most complex infrastructure projects of the century, featuring experts and specialists in the fields of transportation, infrastructure, and policy. We're grateful and want to thank the Museum of Modern Art for letting us host our event in its Coleman Education Center this evening. This space is absolutely beautiful, and we're so happy to partner with them and to know that we have such a wonderful friend in the community. I would also like to acknowledge and thank our distinguished panelists, as well as our sponsors for tonight's event. State Senators Liz Krueger and Brad Hoylman-Sigal, State Assemblymember Tony Simone, Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine, Councilmember Erik Bottcher, who's with us tonight, Manhattan Community Boards 1, 4, and 8, and last but not certainly least, the District 5 community at large. Our community has actively participated and stayed involved during countless meetings, hearings, and discussions held over the past 2 years, and we're particularly grateful for their loyalty and activism. We want to thank CB5's board office for their help in organizing this event. We open tonight's proceedings with the chair of Community Board 5's Transportation and Education Environment Committee, EJ Kalifarsky, followed by tonight's moderator, Layla Law-Gisiko, Community Board 5's Land Use and Zoning Committee chair. My friends EJ and Layla have been working closely on all aspects of the dilemma of Penn Station, with Layla relentlessly spearheading and guiding us through all this lengthy journey. So I'll start with EJ.
Thanks, Craig. Good evening, everyone. I'm EJ Kalifarsky. I'm the chair of the Transportation and Environment Committee of Community Board 5. As a member of Community Board 5 and an enthusiastic advocate for better transportation, I'm honored to speak to you tonight about the future of Penn Station. But before we jump into the future, we felt it would be helpful to briefly look at the past to better understand the context that defines the situation that we see today. Once upon a time, Penn Station had a grand presence as a train hub. It was built in 1910. It was designed by McKim, Mead, and White in the Beaux-Arts style. It was hailed as a marvel of engineering and architecture. There we go. The situation was considerably different 50 years later. Pennsylvania Railroad sold Penn Station in 1963 to cut losses from declining passenger train service. The rise of automobiles and air travel reduced ridership, making upkeep of the grand but underused station too costly. The land was repurposed for Madison Square Garden and an office complex. And with the original station's demolition in 1963, the current underground station was built with an intended capacity of 200,000 passengers a day. Starting in the 1980s, commuter rail trends shifted again, leading to increased ridership. By 2000, the station was serving over 600,000 commuters a day, 3 times what it was intended for, and making it the busiest transportation hub in the Western Hemisphere. The Penn Station of today is a cramped and crowded place with dark corridors, obviously lacking the grandeur of its past. Its platforms are narrow and congested, particularly due to columns specifically for Madison Square Garden and 2 Penn Plaza above, obstructing the passenger flow on the platforms. Penn Station is also the heart of a complex rail network where the Northeast Corridor and our regional commuter rail network intersect. The Northeast Corridor is a 457-mile rail route operated by Amtrak that connects Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. It supports a $2.6 trillion economy. Its resiliency is universally considered critical for the entire country. The regional rail network around New York is operated by the Long Island Railroad, New Jersey Transit, and Metro North. Major towns served include Stamford, New Haven, New York, Trenton, Philadelphia, and Ronkonkoma. Combined, the three serve over 800,000 commuters daily and span over 1,700 miles of track. The majority of these lines terminate at Penn Station, and those that don't terminate at Grand Central Terminal, which is incidentally also located in Community Board 5. Out of the 800,000 daily commuters transported by the entire network, 75% of those end up at Penn Station, but the system is not unified and is not connected. There are currently 4 proposed rail and infrastructure projects directly related to or connected to Penn Station. We'll quickly go over them one by one. The Hudson Tunnel project has a scope to construct 2 new tunnels under the Hudson River and then to repair the existing 110-year-old tunnels from damage caused by Superstorm Sandy in 2012. The goals of the project are redundancy, reliability, and resiliency. Next up, the proposed Penn Station expansion would create a new terminal to the south. It would accommodate the expansion of Penn Station capacity through new tracks and platforms. The majority of the new train traffic that'll be using the new Hudson River Tunnel will be New Jersey Transit traffic going to the Penn expansion, which will be designed as a stub end station. Once at the expansion, New Jersey Transit trains will discharge passengers and then either leave the station to a train yard or wait to board new passengers for the reverse trip. The expansion would require demolishing Block 780 to the south and some buildings to the east and west of it. Next up, thirdly, is the Penn Station reconstruction, which would reconstruct the existing Penn Station within its current footprint. The scope would focus on the user experience and provide additional entrances, improved wayfinding, and increased access to daylight. The concourse of Penn Station would be converted to a single level, eliminating the mezzanine level. Finally, and fourthly, Penn Access is an extension of the Metro North New Haven line that will take passengers into Penn Station. It'll create 4 new accessible stations in the East Bronx and improve existing tracks and bridges. It'll create a 1-seat ride between Penn Station and the East Bronx, Westchester, and Connecticut, and it's currently under construction. There are also 2 other related projects and issues that affect Penn Station as well. These are the Penn Station General Project Plan, or the GPP, and Madison Square Garden itself. The General Project Plan is a real estate plan introduced by then Governor Cuomo and continued by Governor Hochul. The project proposes to bulldoze 6 city blocks to make way for as many as 10 super tall office towers. The majority landowner is the developer Vornado. The project is currently in limbo as, according to Vornado, market conditions are not conducive to office development. The GPP has been pronounced dead by Senator Comrie, Assemblymember Simone, and our very own community board. Finally, Madison Square Garden, which operates under a special operating permit. The current permit will expire in July of this year. Findings that need to be made in order for a new special permit to be issued include that MSG must be compatible with Penn Station. Our community board voted last week and found that MSG is not compatible with Penn Station. But the City Council, however, will ultimately determine the fate of MSG. There are many challenges with Penn Station's current state: delayed investments and improvements, lack of regional rail connectivity, lack of regional planning, risk of neighborhood destruction, capacity and growth limitations, and uncertain funding. But the goals for Penn Station, the region, and our neighborhood, which hopefully we all agree on, are to increase throughput, capacity, and connectivity, to promote greenhouse gas reduction and climate resilience, to remain competitive, to develop a unified rail network, to improve the public realm, to protect the Penn neighborhood against undue negative impact, to reduce inequality, and to support sustainable and equitable development patterns. There is general agreement about these goals, although the ways to achieve them diverge greatly. At the end of 2022, Community Board 5 convened a task force to develop a community-led improvement plan for the Penn Station neighborhood. We believe that a plan that achieves the main goals of stakeholders can be conceived and implemented. Among the many principles here are a few that should be emphasized. We promote comprehensive planning, We prioritize transportation over real estate. We support sound community engagement. We advocate for at-risk residents, and we advocate for a viable, fiscally responsible funding scheme. Tonight's panel discussion will tackle the ambitious topic of Penn Station's future. We'll start the conversation on operations at Penn, first by talking about the station and then the rail network. Then panelists will discuss the funding mechanisms available to upgrade the station and the network. And finally, we'll discuss the impacts to our neighborhood and our community. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Layla Law-Gisiko, who will be moderating this conversation. Layla is the chair of the Community-Led Improvement Plan Task Force and the chair of Community Board 5's Land Use, Housing, and Zoning Committee.
Thank you so much, EJ, for framing this conversation tonight. Thank you all for coming. This is really exciting to be here together to talk about Penn Station, which is really, the core of this conversation that we've had for the past 2 or 3 years. We really want to talk about transit and infrastructure. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. As EJ underscored, Community Board 5 launched a task force a few months ago to look at the comprehensive challenges of Penn Station and its surroundings. We are convinced that talking about transportation first is essential to start this process. So once again, I want to thank MoMA for hosting us tonight. I want to thank our council member, Erik Bottcher, who is here tonight with us. It is great to see you, council member. It is important because Madison Square Garden, the special permit, is going to be in the fate of the special permit is going to be in the hands of the city council. And we know that you're extremely focused on this issue, and we're really grateful for your advocacy and support on this matter. As my colleague EJ presented earlier, tonight we're going to be focusing on 3 core topics. First, we're going to discuss the operational needs and challenges of Penn Station. Both, how do we make the station itself better? We all agree that, Penn Station is really in dire need of improvements. Who in the room thinks that Penn Station is fine the way it is? Yeah, okay, I see no hand going up. We all agree on that. Let's start with, the common ground that we have. We also all agree that moving more people is critical for the region, for our infrastructure, for this country to remain competitive, when we know that London, Paris, and other large cities in the world are actually very, very heavily investing in mass transit. So we'll be talking about that. Then we're going to talk about one of our favorite topics. It's great to agree on what we're going to build, but then the question becomes, how do you pay for it? And we really believe with Community Board 5 that unless you have a sound, fiscally responsible, and well-tested mechanism to fund infrastructure, any plan, as great as it may be, may remain in limbo just because the money is not there. And we are at a very critical and very interesting time. We're going to talk about that with, our federal partner, and especially, am I allowed to call him Amtrak Joe, our president, who really understands that mass transit and rail is a priority, which was not the case for the past, let's say 50 years. Then we're going to talk about, more locally, how are these plans going to impact our neighborhood, our community? I know lots of you here tonight are here. You are members of Community Board 5. You live nearby. You are impacted by it directly. But others of you who are maybe not the immediate neighbors, you use Penn Station, you commute, you use Amtrak to, do inner city traveling. So I think we all have a stake in this particular station, which is why, I think it's a very polarized and emotional topic. And, I'm really hoping that through this discussion with the great panel, we're going to be able to get, to a better understanding of what is going on and how we can move forward. So, we're going to start this evening with a discussion. Because I'm the moderator, I'm going to ask the first question, but you all should have received some little index cards on which you can write your own questions. So please do so. And then some ushers throughout the room will collect these cards. And then towards the end of this event, we will bring these cards to the stage, and panelists will have a chance to answer your questions. So, Community Board 5 is very proud to bring this panel of great experts to you tonight. And I'm going to invite panelists to join us on the stage tonight. So Petra Messick, Senior Director of Gateway Program with Amtrak. Felicia Park-Rogers, Director of Regional Infrastructure Projects at Tri-State Transportation Campaign. Peter Cipriano, Senior Vice President for ASTM. And Chris Ward, former Executive Director of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you guys so much for accepting Community Board 5's invitation. And, as we begin this discussion, I think it would be great if you can all, tell us a little bit about yourselves and your organization, the position you hold with the organization, just, to orient the audience. So maybe we can start with you, Petra.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Petra Messick. I'm a Senior Director of the Gateway Program at Amtrak. I'm an urban planner by training, and I work for Amtrak, and I think, our role here is as the owner of the Northeast Corridor, an electrified railroad that connects Boston to Washington, and owner of Penn Station. Amtrak has a goal of reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2045. And so as an electrified railroad, we have a leg up on that. We also aim to reach 100% carbon-free electrified sources of the Northeast Corridor by 2030. So one of our goals is to increase rail ridership and to bring more people into New York City and to give more New Yorkers access to places they want to go without cars. At Penn Station, Penn Station is core to our operations. 1/3 of Amtrak trips start or end at Penn Station. It's the busiest passenger facility in North America, and EJ did a great job of laying out the context there with a very factual presentation that that gives you the entire rail network that Penn Station serves. But Amtrak, as owner of Penn Station, we're deeply committed to the station and to improving it. And I was invited here tonight, I think, because of our role in two key projects, Penn Reconstruction and Penn Expansion, which aim to transform the station for the riders and the users. I'll just sort of describe each very briefly. Penn Reconstruction is really about improving the building and the passenger concourses of the existing station. So improving the safety, the accessibility, the wayfinding, increasing its presence at the street, creating a unified facility between Penn Station and Moynihan Train Hall, and future Penn Expansion, however we might expand. Penn Expansion is really about the railroad infrastructure, about increasing track and platform capacity, increasing the railroad systems that will allow us to increase rail service into Manhattan from the west as part of the Gateway Program. The Gateway Program is a larger initiative focused on the 10-mile stretch between New York City and Newark, New Jersey, which is our pinch point on the railroad. So we have a 4 or 5 track corridor between Boston and Washington. In many places, it widens out to 6 between Newark and New York, where all the New Jersey transit lines merge with the Northeast Corridor to enter Manhattan. We narrow down to 2 tracks. So that program is about replacing all those aged facilities and then really laying the foundation for future growth. So that's probably enough for an introduction, but thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you, Petra. And next up, Felicia.
Hi, I'm Felicia Park Rogers. I'm the Director of Regional Infrastructure Projects with Tri-State Transportation Campaign. I only work for organizations that have a hyphen in their name to match the hyphen in my own. I'm very pleased to be here. I have been at Tri-State Transportation for 3 years. The Tri-State Transportation Campaign is turning 30 this year. And in that time, our goal and mission has been to work on improving regional transportation and transit, the environment, and equity. And we define the tri-state as New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. So as you saw from the track map that was up earlier, the Northeast Corridor is key to our organization's mission. And what we would like to see is a region in which riders, visitors, residents can get from point A to point B with the most ease at the most reasonable cost, and on transit to reduce car use and to improve access. We also see all of the work in the region and in the improvements in the Penn Station and beyond as part of our regional planning for improving economic opportunity across the whole region. And one thing that we have seen with the COVID epidemic is that the core base of riders, of people who are transit dependent, rode transit all the way through the worst days of COVID and continue to ride today. And even as we see changes in ridership, we still see an incredible need for access to transit to get to jobs, healthcare, school, leisure, recreational, and shopping opportunities and cultural opportunities. We'll have a lot more to say, but I'm very pleased to be here. And thank you all so much for coming tonight.
Thank you, Felicia. Next up, Peter.
Hi, thank you for having me. So first, I'd like to just acknowledge Layla and the tremendous members of CB5. You folks have an awful lot of big, complex issues that you're facing in terms of land use, transportation, Penn Station, the GPP, MSG. You know, I live in Brooklyn, we don't have these problems. So I really think CB5 has shown outstanding leadership along with the council member and all your great electeds in trying as hard as we can to sift through the facts, what's true, what's not. So let's give them a round of applause, really, because it's not easy. So I'm from ASTM North America. We are a global developer of transportation infrastructure projects. So what that effectively means is we will design, finance, and build big types of infrastructure. In Italy and in Brazil, for example, we will build roads and then affix a toll to them. And that often has benefits up and down from risk transfer. It enables us to do a lot of advanced community engagement. And of course, in those countries, it can lead to a lot of cost savings. And I say in those countries because in other parts of the world, that model, which we typically call P3, public-private partnership, that model is pretty widely used as a way to finance infrastructure. It hasn't been as widely used in the US because we typically finance our infrastructure in different ways. I agreed to come tonight because there was some press about our thing. And I just want everyone to know tonight's not a presentation of ASTM's plan, but I am very happy to be here. And in June, I hope, if CB5 will have us and CB4 and the others, we are looking forward to a fulsome presentation on our plan, from engineering to design and how we think it would, how we really think it would improve the condition at the station today, which is what we're completely committed to. And of course, how we would finance it. But tonight I will answer as much as I can. We're working very, very hard. And we in fact just added Vishan Chakrabarty to the team. So we have more work to do to incorporate sort of his civic vision. But you know, I hope that I can be a constructive part of tonight's conversation until I come back to you this summer. So thank you again for having me.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Chris Ward.
Thank you very much, Layla. Thank you for having me. Great to see everybody turning out. Briefly, I'm an independent infrastructure consultant. Moreover, I guess I'm a professional bureaucrat. I used to run the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey from 2008 to 2012, largely responsible for the World Trade Center, but other projects as well. And before that, I was Mayor Bloomberg's environmental commissioner at DEP for his first term. And prior to that, I was at the Port Authority before, from 2002 to 2008 as deputy executive director. So I'm delighted to be here and have just been involved with a fair number of very large, complex urban infrastructure projects going back over the past 15 or 20 years.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to the panelists. So let's jump right in. As I described and underscored, we're going to go from, we're going to talk about operations first. And I thought it would be useful to start actually with the station itself. I think we all agree, there was not one hand that went up when I asked, is anybody in love with the current Penn Station? Okay, nobody is in love with the current Penn Station. What are we doing to improve the station? And what is the goal of improving Penn Station? Is it just cosmetic? Is it for safety? Is it for capacity increase? And maybe I can turn the first question to you, Petra. Amtrak owns the train station. You lease the train station to two operators, and coming up with a third one with Metro North, who will come in 2027. Tell us a little bit about what is the condition, both at the station and maybe the platforms and the tracks, and tell us what needs to be improved in your view.
Thank you, Layla. Certainly. So Penn Station, incredibly complex railroad operation. Amtrak is the owner, but we're actually the minority user. So the commuter railroad operations of New Jersey Transit and Long Island Railroad actually dwarf Amtrak trains at Penn. And as Layla mentioned, we expect Metro North trains to soon join us at Penn Station. So just like a little bit of the layout, and oh great, I see a track diagram behind me. So there's 21 tracks at Penn, supported by two rail yards, the West Side Yard on the west side of Manhattan and Sunnyside Yard in Queens. Amtrak runs through the station, up to Boston and beyond, and down to Washington and on to Florida in some cases and other points. Ironically, our through trains, the intercity trains, dwell, for the longest time at the platform because we have a very different operation than the commuters, with passengers and baggage who take a longer time to board or alight the train. The commuters know where they're going. They get on and they get off quickly. And the station is actually utilized quite efficiently. So there's about more than 1,300 daily train movements that come through 4 East River tunnels to the east, the 2 North River tunnels under the Hudson River, and the Empire Tunnel, which is a single track tunnel that runs down the west side of Manhattan, and then enters Penn Station from the west. And those tunnels during peak operations are running trains at, in some cases, less than 2-minute headways. And then they approach the station tracks. In some cases, they can queue up in parallel to each other. I'm not going to try to point to that diagram because it's directly behind me. But again, they can, there are places for them to wait as they're assigned a track. And then the station is operated and dispatched by Amtrak and Long Island Railroad employees. And a group of folks who have incredibly specialized knowledge about how this station works and keep it running day in, day out, to deliver this symphony of operations under very challenging conditions. A station that was built over 100 years ago by the Pennsylvania Railroad for intercity travel at the time, and a small portion of Long Island commuter service, which over the years morphed into 3 times as many passengers and more than double the number of train movements. And now is just, sort of struggling under the weight of all that use. So I'll just say Amtrak's priorities for the station. I mean, one, as we plan these long-range projects, the Gateway program, Penn expansion, Penn reconstruction, we're still devoted to the station itself. And as we've moved our customer-facing facilities across 8th Avenue to Moynihan Train Hall, we continue to invest in the station. We've invested over $300 million in recent years. We're improving the 32nd Street entrance and improving access there in partnership with Vornado. We have the Art in Amtrak program, which I hope you have a chance to see now or in the future. So we continue to invest and improve the station, but to carry out these bigger moves, right? To introduce more light and air into the station, to create remarkable moments in the station where you know where you are and you can see the street. That takes the cooperation of our partners, the MTA and New Jersey Transit. So that, and the community and the stakeholders. So that is what we're engaged in now. And it's a longer range planning process, very much in partnership with the existing and the future users of the station facilities.
Yeah, this is actually, maybe I'm going to turn the question now to Peter. You guys created and designed a plan. What did you have in mind? What are you trying to address with this particular proposal?
Well, our vision, fundamentally, our proposal is taking a page right out of the master plan that the railroads completed a couple of years ago, and a lot of those aspirations. So first off, I'd point out our proposal is one which envisions the garden remaining and 2 Penn Plaza remaining. So, our overarching objective, and not necessarily because that's our decision, but because those are the constraints that were considered in the master plan. So our objective was to add as much air, light, space, an opportunity for vertical access from the platform in the station, given those conditions. And a tremendous amount of work, I should point out, went into that initial master plan study that Amtrak worked on, of course, with NJT, and under the leadership of the MTA. And I do want to acknowledge a great public servant, Mr. Peter Matuzewicz, is in the audience, and somebody who's worked very, very hard on this. And so we took those inspirations and a lot of time, the last 2 years, and a lot of money to develop them further. And we were able to do that, yes, in partnership with the other property owners. Maybe cooperation is a better word than partnership, because in order to do more advanced engineering, you need design, you need existing condition, you need drawings, and those aren't just available at the local library. And so we've come up with something that really does eliminate quite a few columns, despite the garden remaining. That does bring daylight in 2 locations in such a way that we believe 80% of passengers coming off a platform in the morning would emerge into a daylit experience. And so those are the things that we're further refining now, and we're very excited to show this summer.
Awesome, and we very much welcome the opportunity to, having you guys and give the presentation when it is ready for that. Just to clarify, and I think it's been reported in the news, your proposal would have an entrance on 8th Avenue.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay.
So the best opportunity, in the event that the garden remains, the best opportunity, without question, it's a mathematical geometric fact. The best opportunity to add space to the station is at 8th Avenue, in the space formerly known as the Hulu Theater. Now it's once again the theater at Madison Square Garden.
Okay.
So we're able to acquire that property and sort of extract it, cut it out, and create a grand train hall the size of the hall at Grand Central, another great CB5 facility, and bring in a lot of daylight. And
how many columns are you able to remove?
This is like a GMAT exam. How many ping pong balls can I fit in the 8th Avenue train hall versus the mid-block? So it's quite a few. I will be happy to bring all of that data in June. Okay. and lots of experts. but it's quite a number. If you can imagine yourself on that level B space, that Amtrak space, if you will, where the boards are, there are a number of columns. All of those are gone.
Okay. Okay, so
Yeah.
it is significant.
Yeah.
So I want to turn it to Felicia and to Chris. I think that we've had conversations about not only the passenger experience. I mean, we care deeply about the passenger experience, but I think we recognize that also operationally, what people want to see, when they use Penn Station, when they get out of these trains, like getting off these platforms is a challenge. Getting from the platform to the concourse is a challenge. I think in the some documents and some review of the GPP, the General Project Plan, for members of the audience who are not familiar with all these acronyms, it basically states that there's only one platform that meets the NFPA code, which for those who are not familiar with NFPA, I wasn't until 2 weeks ago, is the National Fire Standard that basically grades public facilities. So Felicia, when you look at these issues, how do you think about this particular relationship between the concourse and what has been discussed in the reconstruction plan and the master plan, and the platforms, and in terms of actually operational challenge?
Just a small question. I appreciate that. Thank you, Layla.
Well, I know you've spent a lot of time on this. Sorry for throwing it so openly.
Yes. No, it's very good. I wonder, EJ, is it possible to put that slide that showed, or is anybody to put the slide that showed the people disembarking from the platform?
Oh, the crowded platform. This is from EJ's presentation. Let's see if the.
I almost had an anxiety attack just looking at that photo.
Yeah. I'm sure we can
So,
pull it back up.
As I was saying before, Tri-State is a regional organization, and what we're looking at here are what are the needs of the region through the eyes of the rider. Oh.
We need to kill this music. I have no idea where this is coming from.
And now
It sounds a lot more stressful than that, actually.
I moonlight. No. Sorry, I didn't mean to throw the whole presentation by asking for that slide. But I think that you've probably all been on one of those platforms, embarking or disembarking from a train. And you know what I'm talking about. We have concerns about the safety at the platform level. We have concerns about the operations at the track level. As Petra laid out very well, it's an incredibly complicated station with so many trains coming and going from different railroads. Although LIRR and MTA, and Metro North are both part of the MTA, they in many ways operationally function as two separate railroads. So what we would love to see from the rider experience and visitors, we are now back at 60 million visitors a year to New York City already. Pre-pandemic, we had our highest number of annual visitors in 1 year at 77 million. So we're actually not that far off from our highest number. And what we would like to see is a system where there's a sign, there's a place to buy your fare, there's a place to wait and get your coffee or, your beer, and go onto your train, whether you're going to Newark or Boston or Montauk. So what we want, and we put out a regional rail report about 6 months ago, talking about having a seamless rider experience so that there's a combined fare system, there's a combined wayfinding, and there is the concourses have an internal logic that make it easy for riders, like as Petra was saying, in terms of being able to know where you're going in terms of finding the street from inside of the station, or in my case, from finding the station from the street sometimes you can't always find the entrance. And so anyway, what we would like is to start at the track and platform level to make them safe and easy. In an ideal world, you would be able to to wait for and then get on your train from the platform. There's a lot of safety concerns and difficulties. The headways are made very slow because everybody has to stay upstairs and then have their train called, and then everybody runs downstairs, and you have about this much space on the platform to go along and to find your way onto your train. So this is confusing, dangerous, and just doesn't meet modern standards of transit and rail travel.
So it's actually a very good segue, Chris. I want to turn it to you. You've been involved in, a bi-state agency. You understand the intricacies of, getting stuff done when you have multiple partners. I think it's fair to say that, Penn Station is one of the most complex, train hubs probably in the country. How do we reach more, unified organization at Penn Station and maybe for the entire region? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure, thank you, Layla. Right, so I'm not going to comment on track capacity and platform that, but taking Layla's question, I think all of you are here motivated by the positive public spirit of there's a part of this debate that you would like to see articulated wherever you come from, whether it's the community, whether you're an Amtrak passenger, whether you're an MTA passengers. And I think the challenge has been is that I used this analogy before, but it's sort of like a game like pickup sticks in Penn Station. And the reason why it gets confusing and controversial and that we don't seem to be making much progress is that the interrelationship from all of the projects that we just described is like the game of pickup sticks, that if you make one decision in one part of the project, it's going to affect another part of the project. And I think a unifying concept is the hierarchy of needs in a way that's almost implicit in the agenda that you just laid out, that we need to start with what are the amount of passengers that need to come into the station? Where are they now today? How can those platforms be built in a safe, reliable way? What additional platforms or capacity do we need? And where would that end up going? And how would you construct that? Then, as Peter made clear, there's an independent decision to be made on whether the garden is staying or going. And if it stays, there are huge considerations of exactly how you're going to design a new, better Penn Station now that you have that long-term opportunity. And through all of that, my only analogy was that if we have to stay focused on the passengers, the amount of capacity, where they're going to go, and what is their experience going to be, because when we all start to worry about, well, is it the land use that's deciding this, or is it the garden deciding this, I'm afraid we lose track of what's most important. And there's a tremendous cautionary tale when these things don't go well, as we were just referencing, on East Side Access. The idea that we spent the amount of money that we spent to create East Side Access, $12 billion, 10, 15 years late, largely because of the inability of our transit agencies to fully integrate a plan which reflects those hierarchy of needs and priorities. And I think that for all of us is the planning challenge at the beginning of this process, because we're not at the end of it yet.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good point. So, it's the perfect juncture to ask the tough question. We've talked a lot about how to move trains in the region. There is talks of creating an expansion which would basically be used as a stub end. Trains would come in and then go back. There is of course the notion of through running that has been advocated by a number of groups, including Tri-State Transportation Campaign and Rethink Penn Station. There are other options. Deep cavern has been mentioned. I don't know how serious that is. A northern expansion has been discussed. Petra, can you tell us a little bit where we are? Do we understand correctly that Amtrak is favoring a southern expansion, but at the same time, the NEPA review will contemplate multiple alternatives? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. So where we are is that Amtrak has hired a design consultant to begin concept development for Penn expansion, and we're doing that work in close partnership with New Jersey Transit, which will be the primary railroad user of the expanded station. So we are pre-NEPA. We will absolutely have to prepare an environmental impact statement for this project. We have not yet identified whether the federal sponsor of that EIS will be the Federal Railroad Administration or the Federal Transit Administration. So those discussions are ongoing, and the roles of each of the agencies in that process. But to sort of give you an understanding of the kind of work that we're doing right now, the trains that we're trying to accommodate in Manhattan that will utilize, hopefully, the new Hudson River Tunnel that will be built as part of the Hudson Tunnel project. So we'll have new tunnel capacity coming into Manhattan. These are commuter trains. The new tunnel will be able to accommodate up to 24 trains or more, but around that level through the tunnel per hour in the peak direction. And these commuter trains are up to 1,200 feet long, so they stretch longer than a Manhattan block, and they require a ton of room, and they don't turn on a dime. They turn very slowly, so they don't like to go up hills, and they don't like to descend, descend grades, and they can't go up and turn at the same time. So the whole sort of challenge is, how do you bring these incredibly lengthy trains into Manhattan, find space for them, find space for platforms so that we don't replicate what we have at Penn Station, but we have platforms that are ADA compliant, have enough room to, navigate comfortably, wait on the platform as the train is coming into the station, potentially pre-board. So all of that requires just a ton of physical space. So we are looking at, we're trying to develop concepts that would connect to this new tunnel and meet those requirements of bringing in up to 24 new trains into Manhattan per hour. So we know we're going to have to look at through running, because that is a concept that the community has really, identified as, something that we should take a serious look at. So we will absolutely study that. We will also study a southern option, because the new Hudson River Tunnel will be built south of the existing North River Tunnel, and will connect to existing Penn Station from the south. So that's sort of the most logical place to make a connection to an expanded station without sweeping under the station or doing a lot of other gyrations to get to another place. I think we will probably look at a northern option as well, because that was studied and advanced to a certain point during the ARC tunnel project. If you remember your history, that project was canceled in 2010, but it also aimed to bring a new tunnel and new train capacity into Manhattan. I understand the soils under Penn Station are not like that really great hard rock that you look for in Manhattan. So under Penn may be really challenging, especially because how would you then bring the people up through the crowded Penn Station facility to get to street level? But that's those are like the general parameters, is like probably north-south through, and maybe another location if we can find it. The NEPA process has to look at concepts that meet the project's goals, that are feasible from an engineering perspective, and then that are reasonable. So I think that's sort of a useful enough framing for where we are at this point.
Yeah, and for all the members of the audience who don't know what NEPA stands for,
Thank you.
National
Environmental Policy
Act.
Yeah.
So it is the federal level of review of environmental impact of pretty much any project that is done by a federal agency. And because Amtrak
gets federal money for this project,
although you're not a federal agency because you're a corporation. I mean,
we're
not going to get into
a federally
the status
chartered
of
agency with significant federal oversight and federally appointed board members.
You will not be sponsoring the NEPA.
That's true. Through a weird thing, I don't even know how to describe it.
Don't.
We're not allowed to sponsor environmental impact statements. We can do lesser level environmental evaluations under NEPA, but not EIS.
Not EIS.
So we have to have a partner.
So we do understand that it will be an EIS. And for members of the public, EIS stands for Environmental Impact Statement. And it is basically the full-fledged environment type review that it's the strongest you can get, where everything gets reviewed. Then there is a lesser level than EAS, and we usually much prefer the EIS. So we're going to stay a little techie for a little geeky, a little while longer. Peter, what do you expect the environmental review to be for the project that you would bring forward?
It's not my call, of course. That ultimately it would be the public partners' call. The state of New York with the MTA, New Jersey Transit, Amtrak, of course, and then also the federal government, the agencies, as Petra said, FRA and FTA. They'll come and look at a project that's brought to them and make an assessment of their own, and decide what level of engagement's necessary. I will tell you, to the extent that anybody cares what I think or what ASTM thinks on that question, I am of the view that robust public engagement is absolutely the only way that we're ever going to get a new Penn Station. And we want it to be a station that as many people as possible in CB5 and beyond are happy with and really proud of. And you can't get that without giving people multiple looks and multiple opportunities to express, every kind of view, from the design to accessibility to how it's paid for to the potential impacts during construction and beyond. Obviously, there are significant truck loading concerns on the superblock, which any station project has to reconcile. And we are very excited because we think we have. But so that being said, it certainly, at least it has to be a very robust EA. But I would welcome an EIS, and where the sort of engagement that we'll be doing this summer with you is really pre-NEPA engagement. And the idea has to stand for itself. So the more that people want to take a look and have something to say, the better. It's the only way it gets done right.
Yeah, great, great. Just to go back to the tunnel issue, is the geometry of the tunnel set, Petra? And does that determine sort of like a lot of things that happen at Penn? Or is the geometry set in New Jersey under the river, but then from the river up, there is some, I don't want to say wiggle room. I know that tracks don't wiggle.
Well, I can speak to the status of the Hudson Tunnel project. It's at 30% design. It has a record of decision from the Federal Railroad Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. So it already went through that lengthy environmental impact statement from 2016, and we thought we were going to get our record of decision in 2018, and then it went on pause during the Trump administration, and we finally got our record of decision in May of 21, I believe. So the desire is that project is fixed and going into construction very soon. There's actually a Gateway Development Commission board meeting coming up next week. There's an industry day tomorrow morning, at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, I believe. So they're in the process of, they're developing construction packages. So they're dividing up the pieces of the project and looking at talking to the industry, getting input on the industry of the best way to divide and conquer, organize the different firms for, to bid on these contracts. So while it's only at 30%, some of the contracts will go to design build, meaning that the contractor would then advance them to 100% design while they're, and construct. And then some packages may go design bid build packages that may involve more advanced railroad systems where we just absolutely have to get everything right to run the railroad on the Northeast Corridor. So that's a long way of saying that, I think that we're not looking to change the alignment of the Hudson Tunnel project, and it has a separate purpose and need than the Penn expansion project. It is a resiliency project that connects the Northeast Corridor to Penn Station so that we can take the North River Tunnel out of service and do the necessary repairs. Now, how you could connect in the future to that tunnel project, there are various ways that it can be accomplished with some disruption to the railroad, outages, but potentially not disastrous disruption. And we'll now have 2 sets of tunnels once that's complete. So, yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Okay. So let's move on to our next favorite topic, the money piece. All these projects are rather very expensive, and they should be expensive. They are very ambitious. They are, there's a lot of deferred repairs, maintenance. I think that the total bill for the state of good repair for the Northeast Corridor is $100 billion, it's an astoundingly high number. But at the same time, it's all that money that we haven't spent in decades. So, what are good practices to actually fund infrastructure? Maybe I'm going to throw the first question to you, Chris. How do we fund infrastructure? How did we do it in the past, for the past 10, 20 years? How do other states do it? And are we doing it right for this particular Penn Station project?
So when you think about transportation funding in the United States, I think we've come into a much more varied universe for alternatives. Before, it was fairly straightforward. This was a federal and then a local match process, and it was triple tax exempt, and that's how you'd go out and you'd build your projects. But as local agencies, the MTA and the Port Authority, face increasing constraints on their financial capacity, albeit that they are the least expensive money to build, you can find, as Peter has demonstrated, P3 opportunities to use somebody else's money, albeit slightly more expensive, but borrow it because you don't have any at the time, and then create a financial structure to pay that entity back. The Port Authority was very successful in doing that on replacing the Goethals Bridge. It was a P3 project that used an availability payment, which means it isn't the tolls which pay for the bridge, rather it's the Port Authority's overall financial capacity. Similarly, LaGuardia was a P3 project. In that case, a lot of it is the wrap up of the revenue, where you have a revenue risk project, which makes it very different than a P3, which is on availability payment. Then, as Petra was making clear, you're seeing a variety of federal funding now, which is much more creative, where you have long-term, low-interest loans, either a TIFIA loan or a RIF loan, and these are federal grant support programs, which allow you to borrow money at extremely low interest rates for the long term. Some of these funding schemes mechanisms are up to 30 to 50 years, and they become very creative ways to do long-term infrastructure. And I think mostly we have a tremendous federal commitment here, which is something that can never be missed historically, that if New York as a blue state does anything to potentially look like we do not have all of the ideas to spend all of this money, and we lose any of it, it'll be shame on us, because we're talking probably grand total, I don't know, Petra or Peter, what are you, $60 billion worth of
80.
80, there you go, $80 billion. So, well,
What are we measuring? What's the 80? The need?
So, Felicia.
All I'll leave you with is the size and complexity of this project will take all of these innovations to successfully pull off all that we want to do. There's not enough money in any single fund to potentially meet the need long term, but there are a lot of very creative ideas out there, from the private sector with the P3 all the way up to the creative federal programs.
Yeah, Felicia, I think that you have spent a great amount of time actually, digging through all these various sources of funding. You and I have spent also a great amount of time on the CACWAG, another acronym, Community Advisory Committee Working Group, and that was convened by ESD, another crazy acronym, the Empire State Development Corporation, which is the economic arm of New York State, that actually put forth a real estate proposal to bulldoze 6 city blocks around Penn Station to build up to 10 office towers. At the time we sat through these meetings, we were told that this funding scheme was actually critical to move forward with the train projects, with the Penn Station projects. What are the views of Tri-State on this particular question, and what is your advocacy in terms of funding?
Can I bring up Rachel Foss? Rachel Foss of Reinvent Albany is here, and she's done some tremendous work and some wonderful reports on this subject. What I can say about it more than the details are that it is really true that we are in an extraordinarily unique moment in transportation history right now. We have Amtrak Joe. We have the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is the most funding for transportation since Eisenhower. We have Governor Hochul, who supports change at Penn Station and wants to put her stamp on it. We have Governor Murphy, whose #1 priority is the Gateway Project and Hudson Tunnels. We have Senator Schumer, who is the Speaker Majority Leader of the Senate. If we can't get this done right now, it's never going to happen. Truly, it has to happen. Gateway Project is well on its way. It's not a done deal, and we need it to happen. It is the #1 highest priority infrastructure project, not of New York, not of the region, but of the United States of America. It's got to happen. It has to happen for resiliency. It has to happen for safety, and it has to happen for capacity and for the economy. So that has got to keep moving forward. And I encourage all of you, to whatever degree you're ever in touch with your Congress members or your senators, cheer them on. This is not a done deal, and we need to close the deal. Joe Biden is about to re-announce his re-election campaign tomorrow, and he could lose. And we all saw what happened when President Trump was in office, and New York was at the bottom of the list for every single thing. Now, we're talking, not only are we talking about the TIFIA loans, the infrastructure grant dollars, but there's a historic rail title that was part of the infrastructure deal. And a lot of that was also thanks to Congressman Jerry Nadler, who has a long passion for rail projects. And through that, we have an opportunity to have as much of an 80% match from the federal government for our local match for these projects around Penn Station. And that is why it's incumbent on us to do what Chris was saying. We need to look at function first, then form, and we need to move, and we need to do it all really, really quickly. And I don't know that I answered the specifics,
no,
but
I want to say
awesome.
this is a
I just-
terribly exciting time.
I just want to, just throw it to Petra. Do you believe that we need to rely on the GPP to fund Penn Station projects? And can we just settle this matter once and for all?
Okay, Petra.
I don't think we ever thought we were going to rely on the GPP solely.
Okay.
Taking sort of a step back, the construct for the Gateway program, just to speak of the rail program that I'm closest to, has always been that we would seek to secure about 50% federal funding and 50% by state. So 25 to the state of New York, 25 to the state of New Jersey. Now, the bipartisan infrastructure law really changes that calculation, where we have the potential to gain up to 80% federal funding and potentially reduce the state's shares. And by the way, we count the Amtrak funding, we sort of fold that into the federal funding. Although we can use our passenger revenues to count as local match for that federal funding. So we've always assumed that there's going to be a blend of funding sources coming from the states and the feds to support this program. And we at Amtrak don't presuppose how the states are going to raise their revenue. The states have many different options for creating revenue streams that they can borrow against. We saw it in the state of New Jersey, where they raised the gas tax. They issued bonds. They secured a stream of funding to contribute somewhere around $600 million to the Portal North Bridge project, which is now in construction for over a year now. And so the states have lots of options. Real estate is one of them, but I would never narrow it to just real estate as a way to secure those funds.
Chris has a
But,
follow-up,
I mean,
and then
I
I really want to throw it to Peter, because he's bringing some new ideas that we really want to talk about.
Go ahead.
No. Chris, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and again, this is for the public here. A lot of what people are somehow in their imagination have gotten have turned this project upside down, if you will, so that somehow the air rights for the 10 towers is what funds Penn Station, and that we would never have a new Penn Station unless we have 10 air rights buildings. That's the tail wagging the dog here, that the air rights they're tornadoes, and they're actually fairly modest when you look at the total project costs. And there's some land use questions about how the community wants to deal with development at grade, but we shouldn't tie ourselves in knots and think that the air rights is what unlocks the opportunity to expand and build a new Penn Station. The air rights might be locations which provide important access, egress, ventilation, safety to the new expansion of Penn Station, hence the GPP, but it's not driven by the need to secure that revenue to build Penn Station.
Yeah, very, very good point. Thank you, Chris. So Peter, we are excited to have you on the panel because you bring the concept of P3, which we have not really talked about in the context of Penn Station. So tell us another acronym, P3, what is it, and how does it work, and how does it work specifically for Penn? How are you going to put money in and get money out and get this thing going?
So it stands for public-private partnership. Chris did a very good job a little bit ago sort of explaining how P3s work and the two main models. And Felicia, that was an excellent overview of the bipartisan infrastructure law. I have to tell you, I've heard armies of consultants try to explain it. That was much better. That was really great.
Can I consult for them?
Yeah, you should. You should. There's a market, believe me. The way that a P3 would work, or that we're proposing it would work in the context of Penn Station, the way that it works broadly, the developer, in this case ASTM, fronts a large amount of capital, a significant portion of the so-called capital stack, and then may obtain a piece of the funding as a grant, and then a large piece of the funding as debt financing. And that debt can be obtained a number of different ways in different projects, through bonds, through taxable bonds, through tax-exempt bonds. In this case, we would absolutely propose, just as Moynihan was done, leveraging the RIF and TIFIA programs, which are federal loan programs for infrastructure projects, as Chris said, very long duration, the lowest interest rate that you could get. And then what we would propose to do here, the availability payment model. So we design, which we're of course in the process of doing, construct, and then we would maintain the station for a long period. For example, 50 years, such as Amtrak has done at 30th Street Station in Philadelphia to great success. Same exact model. And then we would be repaid over time, annually over that 50-year period, and we would have to perform over that 50 years. So the facility that we design and build has to be one that we are also very, very confident we can maintain. So having more elevators at Penn Station is a great thing, but having elevators that actually work and are reliable is mandatory. That's absolutely mandatory. That all comes wrapped in the package. Additionally, you're talking about a massive risk transfer. And I, again, look forward to engaging more on the nuances of this summer, but on a project as complex as the reconstruction of Penn Station, we're not just talking about state of good repair backlog, fixing some things, or even fixing a very large number of things. We are talking about the wholesale redesign and reconstruction of this building and making that building work better, much more than better, making it work well with the other two buildings on that super block. That's a tremendous undertaking. And when you have 3 railroads on site, it's a lot of jurisdictional coordination. So the P3 allows you to apply one design, to consolidate the risk vis-a-vis all of those other interfaces, MSG, Vornado, the Amtrak property, the MTA leasehold, the NJT leasehold, the City of New York, et cetera, to cap the project cost such that any overruns during the period of construction are on ASTM. So we are really placing a huge bet by saying we have done an enormous amount of diligence. We've designed this, what we believe will be an excellent passenger experience, and we know we can deliver it at this cost, which is a number that we'll produce when I come to see you this summer. And so that's what you get. So Chris said, and he's right, that there are some added costs with that extra capital, or that upfront capital, excuse me, that the private entity, the developer, fronts, which in this case would be used to acquire and demolish the theater on 8th Avenue. But it's not that much of an extra cost. We're not talking about dozens of percentage points. It's not that much. And if you look at it, that cost increase as compared to what you can have with an East Side Access or a project which didn't have that model and just faced dramatic cost overruns, the taxpayer can be exposed to triple, quadruple price tag. So it really is a balance. And
So to recap, you are putting equity
yes,
and you're taking the risk.
correct.
All right.
Very well said. Thank you.
All right.
I should hang out with these guys more often.
I know, totally. Chris, you have experience with P3s. Do you see this model applicable to Penn Station? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think creativity in the financial markets is to be accessed and rewarded. Unfortunately, the reason why we're doing it is, I hope I made clear, it's not because you want the private money, it's because you need the private money. And if you didn't get the private money and figure out how to use it and leverage it, we wouldn't be able to do all the things that we otherwise did. I mean, to be clear, the Goethals Bridge for the Port Authority, we did not have the money at the time to do it. So it made sense to use, as Peter says, slightly more expensive, borrow it, build it now, because building it now, it's a lot cheaper than waiting another 20 years. And it's difficult and there's a risk transfer, but no, I think it lends itself perfectly with projects.
Should
Can
we
I throw in one thing I forgot that I
Yes,
think is really
go-
important?
go
Very
ahead.
quickly. So for this federal grant money that Felicia described excellently, there is, despite how much there's still a huge competition. The historic number of dollars, and unfortunately the historic backlog on the corridor, right? In order to access that money successfully, one of the key drivers is project readiness. So if Maryland can demonstrate more project readiness than New York on any particular project, then they will get the money, or they will get more of the money. We may not get it. We may get not as much as we hoped. So an enormous benefit of ASTM's approach to Penn Station is that we bring tremendous project readiness to the Penn reconstruction project, because of the amount that we've already invested and the time we've invested in figuring out, the legal disentanglements with the garden and how we would build it and how long it would take, et cetera. So just one important point.
Okay. So actually on the readiness issue, we noticed that Penn Station was not included in any of the inventory for FRA grants in 2022. The expansion was not in it, and the reconstruction was not in it. And in the FTA grant for formula funding, there was nothing for Penn Station. Is it cause for alarm, or are we just reading these documents from a point of lay people who don't really understand?
Yeah,
those
so
things.
both station projects are in the inventory, and applications were submitted by the railroads for design for both the projects.
Oh, okay. All right.
So
And that's
no cause
basic-
for alarm, because
Okay.
that's where we are right now. It was
Okay.
premature to submit construction grant applications because we don't know, we don't have the specific construction plans, and we need to, in this competitive grant program, whatever cost you say the project is going to be, well, then you're going to get a grant against that cost. And if you go over that cost, it's on you. So, we're trying to get as smart as possible as we approach the Federal Railroad Administration, who is administering this Fed State Grant Program, and submit projects that, submit portions of projects that are, ready, based on the stage of, their project development stage.
Okay. And my final question on the money piece. We see with your presence, Peter, that there is an appetite for, the private sector to actually get involved and for like private capital to get involved. Should we rejoice? Is that a good sign?
I certainly
And
think so.
I'm gonna throw this question to everyone. We've been told that the funding infrastructure was hard, and seeing private capital being interested is a good sign.
Well, I certainly think so. I'm having a blast, and I'm glad to be here. And so I think it's a great sign. I think it's a great and important project, and I think that there are a lot of advantages that we've demonstrated, and we will demonstrate, and hopefully persuade lots of folks that that having that private participation lets you do a lot of creative things, especially on a site where you have a private property owner.
Yeah.
It's a weird mashup facility, Penn Station's in the basement, as we know. So,
Yeah. So
But
you're
let
not.
me just caution you a bit. I'm sorry, Petra.
Yeah, go
Caution
ahead,
you
Chris.
a little bit. I mean, it takes a lot of hard work to find exactly how you can bring private capital into a project and build the capital stack. So one of the things that always makes me nervous when people talk about P3s, one, they think it's free money. It's not. Someone's got to get paid back. And it's not unlimited. You've got to find the right project that meets the economics to get the payback. So if people are sitting there thinking, well, why don't we just P3 all of Penn Station? You can't do those kind of projects with that size and breadth of complexity. You've got to find the right niche that fits in a particular market at a particular time.
Yeah, Petra.
I've been hearing about public-private partnerships for 15 years or more, and that they have a lot of promise. And I would just say that it's really important that the public sector gain expertise and gain savvy about how to utilize the private sector's funding in the way that is most beneficial to the project. So, that is something that Amtrak is really focused on right now, not necessarily building public-private partnerships, but just building our capacity for capital delivery. We're building a construction organization within Amtrak to rise to this moment of unprecedented federal funding for rail. And to do that, we have to have project delivery expertise up and down the organization that's aligned with our design disciplines. And we have to be smart about selecting project delivery methods that are suited to the projects. And so we're exploring methods and beginning, I think, to utilize like construction manager at risk and other alternative project delivery methods that depart from our traditional design bid build, where we have to have the specifications of the railroad to absolutely 100%, because we have this unique electrified railroad in the Northeast Corridor. It's the only place in the country practically that we have an electrified railroad. It is the only place.
Pennsylvania.
Well, Pennsylvania connects to the Northeast Corridor. So the Northeast Corridor and its branch lines. So we're just, if you're outgunned by the private sector, you're going to produce some bad deals. And so that's, I think, just part of the equation is getting smart about it and sort of aligning it to the project.
Yeah. Great. Awesome. Let's move on to our third topic. Let's go ultra local. This plan is, very much important for the region, for the nation, but it is going to have tremendous and lasting impact to our neighborhood. to our community, including, possibly the demolition of a whole city block if the southern expansion is the preferred alternative. So let's start with, this particular topic. We've talked a lot about the impact that the expansion would have on our community. We are staunchly opposed to the demolition of Block 780. How are we going to enter this next phase of discussion and the NEPA? Is the voice of the community going to be heard? What is going to be the process for the community to engage on this particular project?
Well, I can speak generally about the NEPA process. I mean, I think rest assured that nothing will happen, no physical change to Manhattan will begin until an environmental impact statement has been written, shared with the community, shared with the public. The prescribed public comment periods and public meetings will take place, and nothing will happen until there is a record of decision from the feds. So it's possible that nothing will happen, that the project will not go forward. But it's also possible that after we go through that very prescribed process, which is quite predictable, and that there will be multiple opportunities for public comment and response, that an alternative that does have impacts will be selected. So I can't predict the outcome of that probably 2-year process, but I can say with certainty that it will follow all the very clearly laid out federal laws about what that process has to do.
When is that going to start? Do you have a sense of
We
that?
don't know yet.
Okay.
I wish I had a date for you. We are still in the concept development process, and I don't think we'll start until we have concepts that meet the project purpose and need, and that we believe are truly viable, and that attempt to minimize the impacts as much as possible. So we're still working through those concepts, and again, working out the relationships with the agency partners and the feds.
Okay. All right. The other topic that has been on our minds for the past 2 months is Madison Square Garden. It sits directly above Penn Station. It is seen as a great impediment to actually improving, upgrading Penn Station, both in terms of the passenger experience, safety, but also operations, moving trains quicker, faster through Penn Station. Does Amtrak have a position on MSG? Should it stay? Should it move? Do you have a position on that?
We really don't. And that's because we, as a railroad, we really focus on the issues that the railroad has control over or can impact. So we don't have the money to buy out MSG, for example. But honestly, I think the best way to put it is that we're agnostic. We've always been agnostic on this issue. We think there are ways to transform the station experience without removing MSG. But also, if someone came in and found a solution to remove MSG, well, I think we'd find a way to use that new headspace as well. So it's not been our issue as Amtrak. So we're agnostic.
Okay, thank you. Felicia, I think that you guys at Tri-State have looked quite in depth at the impact of Madison Square Garden on Penn Station. What is your sense of what should happen with Madison Square Garden?
There are more than a few problems with Madison Square Garden. So first of all, they're currently tax exempt, and that needs to change. It's absolutely unacceptable that they are sitting in the prime real estate that they're in, that they're taking advantage of the public transit, that they're taking advantage of without paying back into the tax roll. So we would like to see that change, and ideally for their taxes to be dedicated towards what they understand is the clear benefit of where they are in terms of being, and have those funds go towards improving transit. Secondly, they have not been great partners with the public and with the city in terms of, certainly for all of you who live in CB5, you could, I'm sure, talk about this for several weeks about what terrible neighbors they are and what bad partners. But also, for example, with the Hulu Theater, that when they were approached by the MTA about buying that space in order to improve the station plan, they put the prices far beyond reach of what its acceptable valuation would be for the Hulu Theater at the time. Thirdly, with the current master plan that the MTA created in terms of the taxiway and the loading zones, which would be redone, and the loading zones would be moved underground, and the taxiway would become the station, or the area with the
Atrium.
Atrium, thank you. That would all have to, even though that because it belongs to MSG, they were going to have the taxpayers pay for that, which I find completely unacceptable. So they would have a newly rebuilt Skyway and a newly rebuilt loading zone, while they don't pay taxes, paid for by the taxpayers, which is absolutely not okay. I love the 8th Avenue entrance. That's another thing that they have been unwilling to negotiate around, and hopeful that that's something that they have shown some potential movability, because especially with Hudson Yards and West Manhattan development, and there's just a huge change in traffic and pedestrian flows. It makes all the sense in the world for them to have their primary entrance on 8th Avenue and to free up other space for the public. MSG, one of my biggest concerns about MSG, and I understand exactly what Petra's saying in terms of how to solve the problem of MSG, but they could move anytime. We could spend $10 billion building a station as hopefully a much better station than what we have now, but still not ideal, around MSG. And in 10 years, they could be like, oh, great, we found this new location, we're moving. And then what? We will have put all of our money and invested everything that we have into working around them, who have proven to be a bad faith negotiator and a bad neighbor. And
so this is actually lots of people's worst nightmare. And I think it's fair to say that it is realistic. From what we understand, the lifetime of the venue is, another 20 years. And to get anything built is
another 20 years. 20 years ago, I'd say it was. They ran out of life there.
According to people who associate with MSG, this is pretty much the number that they are quoting. And given that, as Mayor Bloomberg reminded everyone as often as he could, it takes 20 years to build anything in Manhattan. So, if they want to move, they're going to have to start building it today. So are we actually at the perfect juncture to finally have the entire conversation that we need to be having? The federal funding, MSG moving, improving the public realm, getting the agencies to work collaboratively, embracing through running. Is it now the time to make that happen? I'm throwing the question at all of you, whoever wants to take it. Chris.
Oh.
Don't forget the bus term.
Is it time for a paradigm shift, and can we make it happen?
I think we've already begun the paradigm shift. I'll start with that. And I again, the hierarchy of needs, everybody will not get everything that they want out of this project. It's just, there are enough mutually exclusive parts of it that if you make one decision, then something else happens. And if you make another decision, something else happens. The garden moving, as Petra made clear, is not, not driving anything particular in terms of what the station can do and how the station functions. Yes, coming down into the platform creates some safety issues. So all I'm going to say is I think the best thing about this meeting tonight, Layla, is the chance for people to understand we're at the beginning. It's the NEPA process. There are lots of options that are going to happen. We can't blow it, because if we blow it, we're going to lose the money. But you're not going to be able to get every single thing that people want. There will need to be, both on the street level changes. There are going to be different things that are going to be happening on the garden level. But I think we've hit that paradigm shift. I think collectively and politically, we need to move on now and begin to organize these different competing needs and these priorities and make some serious decisions about them. So when we go into the NEPA process, it's as, smooth and as thoughtful as it can possibly be with all of the input. But no, you're not going to get some renaissance that every single person who thinks they have a vision for what Penn Station is going to be is going to get realized. That's not going to happen.
So what I find interesting is that in other countries and in other large cities throughout the world, they actually don't have necessarily a unified rail network, but they were able to work in creating a unified rail network. In Paris, for example, you have the SNCF and the RATP, and I'm not going to tell you what those acronyms stand for. You don't need to know. It's two different rail networks, whatever. The reality is that they operate the regional rail network, the RER, and the passengers don't know that at that station it's the driver gets off and the driver from SNCF gets in. They shake hands and off they go, and it is entirely seamlessly integrated. How do we make that happen in the New York metro region?
The lack of funding.
Petra?
Fundamentally, between New Jersey Transit, the MTA, the lack of money is going to require the region to really substantively deal with the integration of the rail network for the purposes of putting them on a much stronger long-term financial footing.
So what we're seeing behind is actually the development of the Paris Metro RER in the course of 50 years, and it's quite astounding. They've been driving, expanding, building, and it all through runs. So it's all entirely interconnected. Is there who is spearheading this vision of a regional network?
Well, Layla, I would just say that the way that Paris and other major cities have implemented that through running is very admirable. If I'm familiar with the RER system with just a little bit, that was built, like if you look at Gare du Nord in Paris, the RER station is at a lower level that doesn't utilize the sort of historic Gare du Nord train shed. So they sidestepped the challenge of a legacy station with a mix of intercity and commuter turnback operations by creating a new facility that through runs. And I believe that approach has been utilized in other major cities around the world as well. So that is actually applicable to a Penn expansion project in which we expand a new commuter facility that can be built to through run in the future. And the NEC Future program, which was a programmatic environmental impact statement that the Federal Railroad Administration led. I'm going to get the years wrong, but like 2009 through 2012, produced a record of decision about the future of the Northeast Corridor. And that vision was it included the Gateway program, it included expanded capacity at Penn Station, and it included a 5th and 6th East River Tunnel to expand the trunk line capacity of the Northeast Corridor. So that already has a federal approval at the sort of programmatic level. And that could be achieved through these incremental investments in the Gateway program. If we build the Gateway program in a way that can not preclude the through running in the future, but to do it to Penn Station itself will involve a lot of disruption to Penn Station itself. And I think we have to ask ourselves, with climate change, with the desire to get people out of their cars, to shift, with the implementation of congestion pricing, could we, rip up half the tracks at Penn Station for an extended period of time, 5 to 7 years, to rebuild the platforms to make them wide enough for through running? That is a trade-off that we would really have to weigh heavily to basically take the only intercity rail connection to Manhattan and put it out of service at the precise moment when we have to achieve massive mode shift to avoid climate disaster.
Of course, the thing is that Amtrak trains do through run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to convert intercity, to convert a legacy station to like a clock face commuter through running operation and mix those intercity trains and the commuter trains is very challenging. And I understand that's why the other world cities that have implemented through running have done it in a new facility, a lower level or an adjacent. London, I believe, is an example of that. So that's the challenge, is how do you mix this? Sorry to interrupt you there.
No, it is. It's very challenging, and we think that there are some alternative ways, and that's what we really hope with the NEPA process, that the through running alternative that's run is a good faith effort at looking at some of the different ways that through running can be made, even if it's not 100%. But right now, the expansion is all stub end terminal tracks, and it does not serve the region. It doesn't serve New Jersey very well. And the next set to make those run through to the east tunnels wouldn't be scheduled till 2080. And if we look at how much delay we've had just with the Gateway Tunnel, which is, through no fault of anyone's except for Governor Christie's and President Trump's, has been extended tremendously. So if we, God forbid, the 2080 becomes.
We'll say the next number.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's.
I mean, I don't know about 2080, but you're absolutely right.
That's the number that New Jersey Transit put on it.
It's the next phase of regional investment. So how soon can we build the Gateway program? And then how soon can we rally all the regional support and the funding for the next phase of a 5th and 6th East River Tunnel? And yes, that's a longer timeline, but I think the flip side of that is how big of a regional rail investment can our region bite off at one time? And the Gateway program is pretty big. We're
Look
just
at our report.
starting.
TSTC.org.
So I think that what is really important to all of us is to find, a way to hear each other's voices and a path forward where, we know we're not going to get everything we want, but how can we work together? How can we support each other towards an outcome that would be satisfactory enough? I don't want to say we're going to settle for less. We should never settle for less, but what is the path forward so that we get things done, because we know it is absolutely critical to get them done now and to get an outcome that we can all live with. You have 30 seconds to answer, or another 2 hours, or maybe we can do all of that again.
Well, I'll just say, Layla, I really appreciate your commitment and EJ's commitment and the community board's commitment to keeping the focus on transportation, because I think we've gotten lost, the state initiative to raise funding around the station, got people focused on the real estate for a while, and it's proper to bring it back to transportation because that is what's driving the need here. So I just, thank you for having this conversation today and to continue to have this dialogue about how do we meet the transportation challenges for the New York region and by extension, our nation.
Yeah. Chris, what are your thoughts?
I'll come back to and kind of repeat myself that I think if we all stay focused at the front of it, keep the organization, the hierarchy of needs in front of us, there's a certain logic that this project can move through, where again, if people understand, we can debate and you might not get everything you want, but you'll stay committed to a public process, I think is going to be important, because there are, just as we went through, there are going to be trade-offs, there are going to be costs, there's going to be service. But I think if we can get away from what's the sort of charged political environment that we're in now, that this is a sort of make or break, that it's us versus the garden, or it's the MTA versus Amtrak and the Southern Bloc. I think we just need to all take a sort of step back and go, there's an awful lot happening. For once, we have a tremendous amount of money. There's some innovative ideas with the private sector. The garden is not a line in the sand one way or the other. It's a thoughtful opportunity to completely potentially reimagine it. And let me end with, the amount of development around Penn Station needs to be consistent with the community board. And Vornado will be, for the inevitable future, a partner in all of those developments, and we need to understand what their long-term ideas are as well. So I think we're at a good place at the front end, and we just should not allow ourselves to sort of get torn apart by thinking that competing priorities can't all be talked about and find the best project going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Felicia.
Maybe Secretary Buttigieg could invite everybody to Camp David for a weekend. Lock all the railroads and all the governors and all the community advocates in one room until we come out with a plan that works for the region, that works for the riders, that works for the labor, and that works for the neighborhood.
I'm in.
Secretary Pete?
Yeah, who can call Secretary Pete? Get him on the phone. Peter.
I think once again, Felicia's spot on. This is really tough stuff. Which is where we started tonight. We're talking about projects that are not only tens of billions of dollars worth of infrastructure, but also are of tremendous national significance. You had all the numbers up there about the GDP impact to the nation. We know that Penn Station is not only vital to the most important region in the country, but also it is a national facility. As Petra said, you can still take a train to anywhere. And I think, in fact, for our country's carbon objectives, we probably would like more people to take more trains, more places going forward. So all of that national priority has to get reconciled right here with local priorities. And that's tough. And the heat is on you and on the folks that you serve and on all the other CB5 members. And hopefully, as Chris said, we are starting in a good place and we can all sort of reconcile those questions together, whether it's, and I'll add this is a community I know as a native New Yorker. This community is not a NIMBY community by any stretch of the imagination, and it is certainly one that appreciates the climate crisis better than, I don't know, just most places in the U.S. Wouldn't you folks say? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think so. So it's not. So everybody wants to get to more trains. Everybody wants to get to more people using trains. Everybody wants, yes, to get to a better Penn Station. That makes you happy to take a train. Now, I think the next couple of years, we've got to figure out just what that looks like. And it'll get resolved. I'm confident. Everyone's going to figure it out. So,
Well, thank you so much to members of the panel. Thank you, Felicia. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Petra. Thank you, Peter. Thank you to members of the audience here. Thank you to all of you who joined us on YouTube. I think you were numerous joining us online. I want to once again thank MoMA for their hospitality. It is really fantastic to have such a strong partner so that we can organize these events. This is the first event of hopefully a number of other opportunities for community engagement. This is critical. Community Board 5 is entirely committed to putting transportation infrastructure first and also making sure that the voice of our community is heard. We are really, really excited to continue the dialogue. We really welcome it. We know that some of these conversations are difficult. They should be, because what is at stake is so enormous. We very much welcome it, and we very much look forward to continued collaboration. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Layla.
Thank you. Thank you.